I know you want to hear me talk a lot, but without further ado, I'm going to bring in deLain W. Clark, a professional mediator and relationship coach. Welcome, Ann. We're glad to have you. Yes, yes, yes. Well, I would love for you to share with everybody, number one, what a professional mediator is and a relationship coach, and what got you into this line of work.
Well, it's really interesting. Way back when I was actually a financial planner or manager for government, and I was still in government work at the time. But as I started to have different motivations in my own life and different interests, I shifted my work from being the financial manager for a team to starting to write their reports and do all these other things that they didn't want to do. But in that same process, I got the opportunity to be part of a new initiative in state government for alternative dispute resolution. And I was with the Department of Health at that time, and I actually wrote all the policies and procedures for their entire mediation program when internal disputes happened within the agency. Soon after that, I then found what ended up being the perfect, when I was actually in a job working for something else, it was the perfect job for me. And that was as the coordinator of the New Mexico Radioactive Waste Consultation Task Force. I know that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And the awesome thing, I mean, it was an awesome job. I had that job for 12 years and I loved it. but the other awesome part was that the cabinet secretary who hired me said, well, as part of this job, you're going to do liaison work between the states and the federal government and this state and other states and government and the people of our state. And so you need to get trained as a mediator. So I hadn't actually gotten trained yet. And she made it part of my job to be also the mediation coordinator for the department. So I was just in heaven. I went to my first mediation course the week of 9/11. I mean, that week, it was 2001, 9/11.
Yeah.
And it, as we all, at least people my age and not too much younger, can completely remember where we were on that day. I was in a mediation course the second day of the week. Since then, I've been doing, I've taken 200 hours plus of mediation courses. I've taught 5 semesters in our local community college of a mediation course. And now I'm retired from state government, and I do this work, and relationship coaching is my primary focus. So relationship coaching is very connected to mediation because it's very much about how do we help parties that are in conflict or having a struggle with a particular relationship talk to each other in a more effective manner. And how do we help them be more sensitive to what's going on for the other person? How do we help them listen better and ask better questions? And so that's where that developed. And in the last year and a half, I've been doing coaching for families that are in crisis over child custody issues.
Well, our first part of our interview with Ann is talking about conflict resolution. And she's kind of touched on it, but I'll just ask a question point blank. And what is a conflict? A lot of people have their perceptions.
So conflict is any time, you as an individual or you with a group of other people, things aren't quite right. We're not quite agreeing. So a very simple example of a conflict that you might experience as an individual, no one else in the room, is you're sitting in a chair and it's uncomfortable. And and I use this as an illustration. The goal here is not to stay sitting in that same position and stay uncomfortable or figure out how to live with it, or what do you know, this conflict of it being uncomfortable tells you I need to move. I need to adjust the way I'm sitting so I fit in the chair better, or maybe I need to move to another chair if that's possible. But something has to change. And that is the same is true when we have conflict in our lives with someone else. Um, that is the same kind of thing that happens in all conflict. What something needs to shift. And conflict is important because it is a trigger for growth. When you see something's not quite right, that's typically what spurs you on to do something more or something better, or see how you can improve it, how you can grow in yourself, or you can improve the environment that you're in.
That's a great way to add it to the next question, which is what does a productive conflict look like?
Okay, so a productive conflict between two people, which is usually the way we use this term in everyday life, is two people have disagreed on how something should be done or what the ultimate decision should be. And the productive way to deal with that disagreement is to ask the other person more questions, to find out what is important to them and why they have that particular viewpoint. So you find out more information. And then if they don't ask you back, then you share, here's what's important for me. And
Right.
this is why I've made this decision, or I'd like us to go this pathway in this situation. And that kind of back and forth of asking, listening, and responding is a productive conflict. And businesses and families need this on a regular basis in order to create shifts and growth in their environment. Simple little issues about, as a child grows older, how much more responsibility should they have? Well, there might be a conflict about what the parent thinks versus what the kid thinks. Having a conversation about that where each person listens to each other and asks the right questions leads to a better outcome and leads to progress so that they can have growth.
Yeah. So, you know, when we had this conversation, I made a note here because I wanted to mention this as part of it. I shared with Ed that I had a situation years ago with an employee that I was working with, and we had a personal conflict. But what was interesting was we were able to set aside the personal conflict to achieve the professional goal. So, you know, I looked at that when you were explaining that as an example of a productive conflict. We were able to set that aside, although, you know, not easy, but the outcome from a professional standpoint was phenomenal. But on a personal level, you know, we had our battles, but, you know, I applaud him for being, I wouldn't say mature because I wasn't really mature about how we handled the personal part, but we were able to set that aside. And I view that as a productive conflict resolution, you know, because we were able to set aside those personal feelings and focus on our professional goals.
Yeah, and so questions that I would ask about that is, what do you think? What does that setting it aside look like when you? I mean, I have some ideas in my head, but so I know from my business life, I'll just give an example, that might look like being both focused on what is the most important outcome that we have today to get done, and how do we interact with each other, you know, kind of creating some unspoken and spoken ground rules with each other. How do we share that responsibility to make that happen, those outcomes?
Yeah. So that leads to the next one, obviously, is what does an unproductive conflict look like?
So your typical unproductive conflict, which most of us are pretty good at some point or another,
Yeah.
is that we get really caught up in how we feel about something. And feelings are important. We don't want to discount that. That is a huge part of the whole situation. It's not like we can sit through and rationally talk through every situation, and feelings are not significant in there. They are. They always are. But the unproductive conflict is when you're caught up in a feeling that causes you to shut down somewhat. So if you're in self-protection mode and you think that this other person doesn't care what you have to say, doesn't listen to you, they've given you a look, they've walked away maybe when you talk to them some other time, and now you've gotten all of these unspoken signs that this person really isn't willing to talk it out, and you're in self-protection mode. And so there's a lot of things that we do. We're going to talk about that a little later, about all the different types of conflict management styles. But suffice it to say that when we're in that self-protection place, we close down some of our thinking capacity. Actually, depending on how self-protection you are, if you're really angry or you feel really hurt, vulnerable, anything where you have some fear that damage could be done, you are going to shut down more of your ability to think through the problem in a productive way. And that leads to all the negative patterns that most of us can imagine.
Yeah.
We've all had those experiences, yelling sometimes walking away, sometimes just saying, this is it, you know. It usually isn't pretty for
Yeah.
somebody, and maybe probably not for both.
Well, so I'm going to throw this one out here because when we were talking about this, we're talking about we're talking about different examples of productive and unproductive. And I know we have some parents on, and I hope some will go back and watch this. But the one example I wanted to ask you about to respond to, which I think could be considered an unproductive conflict, is when a child gets the "because I said so" response from a parent. And I think there's an opportunity here to provide some insight, and I'd love for you to share, kind of what you share with me about that, because I thought it was a phenomenal and great response.
Okay, well, thanks, Antoine. So when we say "because I said so," that shuts the conversation down. And that's the parent being the dominant person saying, I'm the decision maker, and that's the way it is. And the kid feels unheard. And it leads to stewing and building up and fear that they aren't ever going to be listened to, or that kind of thing, if it happens a lot. So there are definitely times
Yeah.
when a parent has to make a decision, and kids have to just go with what the parent says. The best way to deal with that, especially if you've been building a lot of rapport with your kids and said, when there's time to ask them what they think about the situation and work it out in the more productive way that I was talking about earlier, then when it comes time to put your foot down and say, we have to do it, instead of saying, because I said so, you say, I understand your concerns. I can't deal with them right now. You have to trust me on this one. This is what we have to do. And make it like that. It's in it together.
Right.
We have to do this. And please trust me. I'm the parent. I have more experience. I know what's happening. And we'll talk about it later.
Yeah. No, great. That's great. And that's why when you were explaining that, I never, even as an adult thinking, parents always said, because I said so. And that's the first thing I would do is shut down, and my whole attitude changed, my demeanor changed, because it's really negative and feeling like you weren't being listened to. But, knowing that there is a reason behind it, and it's all about the learning process too. And then you also limit the emotional response, negative emotional response, because I think we talked that conflict also, it deals a lot with emotion, and it determines the extent of the productive and or unproductive resolution, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah, definitely.
yeah, yeah. So this is leads us to the styles of conflict. We have 5 of those to talk about, and the first one is one that I think a lot of people probably use, and that's being the avoider. Would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I have to say I definitely fall into this category some of the time. I won't I won't point fingers on that. Um, it is sometimes being an avoider is a really good thing to do. There's moments when this other person is really caught up in anger, or you can see that they're not quite making sense, and there's no progress that can be made right in that moment because of that state. So at that moment, it's best to say something like, well, this is not, doesn't look like a good time. I'm going to take a breath, take some time off. If we have time later, we can come back to it. Otherwise, let's talk about it tomorrow, something like that. So that's a productive way of using avoider. The typical thing, though, that we see is the more unproductive one is parents bringing up to kids, I really need you to clean up your room, and the parent and the kid pretends like they never heard the parent. Right? That's a big avoider. And then the same thing happens kind of the other way. The kid asks, well, I want my curfew to change, or I want this rule to change, and the parent just says, okay, and we'll talk about it later, and later never comes.
Yeah.
It never comes. And in business, actually, I saw this all the time, constantly. There were professional avoiders out there. So it is not limited to families. It is a very well employed technique.
Um, and that leads to the next one, which is the accommodator, or the one that gives in.
So this can feel like a really good way to resolve a conflict. And sometimes, if you're listening to somebody and you can hear that they are super invested in this particular outcome, and you had an opinion, but it wasn't really that strong, or it wasn't ultimately that important to you, or you can see that maybe for the circumstance that you're in, it works better just to let this other person move forward. The challenge with this technique is, if you're a person who does this all the time, then you're not taking care of your own needs. And it ends up, the avoider ends up building up resentment in the other person. The accommodator builds up resentment in themselves.
Yeah.
They start to feel, well, I'm always giving, and I'm always taking care of everybody else. And why am I, nobody seems to notice, and they just walk all over me. This is the internal dialogue that's going on. So the first 4 times you're okay with it, but the 5th time you're starting to like, this is not feeling good. But the other part of you is like, well, it has always worked before. So your brain kind of goes with this thing that worked because you got out of the conflict, you didn't like it. But that other part is going, no, I don't like not having my needs taken care of. So the avoider is, if you're doing that all the time, not the avoider, I mean the accommodator, if you're doing that all the time, you're not making the tough decisions to take care of yourself, and you're not making the tough decisions to take care of your team, which means your family or your work team, either one. If you're in charge, there are a lot of accommodators in leadership positions out there too. And things don't get done when that happens.
Yeah, the director is standing your ground approach to conflict resolution.
So the director is your typical extremely successful CEO who says, this is how it's going to be done, right?
Right.
Or the very strong parent that has it all figured out and knows what's right and wrong at any given moment. And this is my word is final word.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, when we talked about because I said so, there are times when the parent has to put their foot down and say, yes, my word is final word. I like that qualifier in there. You have to trust me on this one because I have more experience.
Right.
That reassures the kid that they are not being degraded or moved aside. But this and directing does get people into high levels of power. And then it also gets them fired.
Yeah.
And however, well, it causes dysfunction in an organization. If you are always telling people what to do, when to do it, how to do it, eventually they get resentful. Just like the ones that have been avoided, the ones that have been told what to do all the time also get resentful.
Yeah.
And the director frequently has no clue that that's happening. And especially if they are in charge of an organization or of a family, the people that are looking to them for leadership are afraid and they won't speak up. And so the parent or that CEO is going down a path that leads everybody astray with all this. And they don't even know it until everything starts to fall apart. They don't know it until it's too late. And there are, I wish I could remember the names. I'm terrible at names. But there are some famous CEOs out there that have crashed and burned due to this particular problem. And I think there was a movie about a super directive dad called The Great Santini.
Yeah.
I may be dating myself here in terms of when that came out. But that didn't go well for him in the end.
Yeah.
No.
Well, you were mentioning that there's times where you have to be that director, put your foot down and say, hey, this is going to how it's going to be. Now, and I shared this with you. It's kind of funny, but at the same time, it's not because it was a learning experience for me. And it's when I was in high school, I think I was telling you about when I was wrestling, I was captain of the wrestling team. And, that whole high profile high school, you can walk around high school with your chest pumped out and, people know who you are kind of thing. And I come home one day, report cards, you come home and I get home and, I got a big match the next day. And my mom sees my report card and she said, you're going to be turning your uniform in tomorrow. And I'm like, whoa, wait. I'm the captain of the wrestling team. I'm the captain, I'm the leader. I can't just quit and do whatever. And her response was to the effect of, I don't care if you're the president of the United States, your wrestling days are over because your grades come first. Your studies come first. And my dad was there and I was kind of looking over, waiting for him to kind of give me some backup, like, hey, kind of let him, whatever. Didn't say a word. And next day I had to go into school, head between my tails, go to the coach and say, hey, I'm done. And he goes, what do you mean you're done? Why are you done? He goes, because my mama said so. And, you talk about a real learning experience. That humbled me for sure. And it was probably the best thing she could have ever done because it taught me, hey, you know what? You don't just get to do whatever you want. You got responsibilities you have to take care of. You have to be accountable. And if you're not, there are repercussions for that. And so that was an example where I thought being direct was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. It was a totally good example of that. And it also fits into a business model as well. In the business world, that may be the most important role of the CEO, is to say, here are our values, to reinforce our values and our vision and set the boundaries of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And that's
Right.
what your mom did. She set those boundaries. As parents, we are in charge of what are acceptable and unacceptable boundaries. So she was directive in response to your not taking the responsibility for one of your primary, your actually, what I'm hearing is maybe the primary responsibility that you had
Yeah.
at the time, which was to keep your grades up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is an excellent example of the value of taking that on at the right time.
Right.
What really makes that potent, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, is that your mom was not the kind of person who constantly told you this is how it is.
Right.
She chose her battles carefully. So you knew that when she said that, it was really, really important.
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely.
she was not just fussing around.
No, no, no. She wouldn't. No, she wasn't fussing around. I can tell you that. There's no doubt about that one. That was cut and dry. But yeah, it was a great learning experience. And I think, like you said, you can instill something early, then it stays with you throughout. And and in my professional career, I kind of use that, like talked about a model in businesses. Those are things I call back on, as in my days in management, that, hey, you know what, I get an opportunity to teach people the same thing I learned early on, in the working world. And I think this is a great example of that. So this leads us to our next one, which is the compromiser, or being a compromising resolver of conflict.
So this is the one that I think takes us a little off guard, because most of us think that compromise is the way to go. That's how you resolve things where two people really can't agree. You can't, you come down to the middle. And I love this book that I have that's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He had been the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. And I highly, highly recommend this book to anybody who's interested in what it looks like to have productive conflict, because this is in high risk situations. And he really talks to you about what negotiation looks like. And that is a very practiced form of productive conflict. So he said, he gave this great illustration right near the beginning of the book, saying never split the difference means. And he said that a husband and wife are getting ready for an event. It's an important event to the wife because she has been involved in, it's a fundraiser, and it's a formal evening, and she's been involved in the planning of it and the fundraiser, and she's a key person. And so you've got to show up. And the wife wants the husband to wear his black shoes, and the husband wants to wear his brown shoes. And what happens if you split the difference?
He's wearing one brown shoe and one black shoe.
Yeah. Now, is anybody going to be happy with that? So that ends up not being the good solution, right? Although I don't know if you're Robin Williams, maybe you wouldn't mind having one brown and one black. But so it's a funny example. We know that would never happen, but it is an example of a very clear example of what compromise looks like. Sometimes compromise is the solution that you need. Just like all of these techniques are, sometimes you need them. Sometimes if there's only one orange left in the fruit bowl and you've got two hungry kids who both say, I really want to eat that orange, then the compromise really is cutting the orange in half and giving one to the one and one to the other. Now in mediation, we actually use this as an illustration of how to do a simple mediation, because there is a scenario where maybe that isn't the case. Maybe the kids don't both want the orange for the same reason. So the parent, rather than just cutting down the middle, can ask each child. You don't want to assume that you need to do the compromise and just cut it in half. Ask them, why do you need the orange? And beginning mediators usually take a really long time to get around to figuring this out. But basically, the one kid wants the peel because he's got a science experiment going on and he needs the peels to grow mold. And the other kid wants the meat because he wants to make orange juice. And so you don't need to compromise, because you can peel the orange, give the peel to one, and the other one can take the meat. Now, they might not have been able to come to that collaborative solution on their own because they are used to being in conflict with each other. These are two brothers, let's say, and they're used to saying, what red when the other one says blue. So they aren't capable of asking those questions. That's why we as parents want to do that good modeling of asking, and then maybe next time they actually might be able to resolve that conflict on their own.
Yeah.
So the compromise works if they both wanted it for the same reason. They both won't be as happy as they could have been if they'd had the whole orange. But the collaborative solution, finding out that they actually had different needs, works even better because they both get as much as they want of that orange.
Yeah. Now, before we get out of this one, I want you to go back to the Chris Voss example with the husband and the wife, because you said he can wear either brown or a black shoe, one of each. Obviously, that's not the right solution. So, what kind of questions would you ask so that they both are coming to a compromising and satisfactory resolution to that?
A collaborative resolution.
Yeah.
So they may end up, one person may accommodate the other because of this questioning. So the husband, if he's like on his game and knowing this is important to his wife, asks, so why is it important to you that I wear the black shoes? And let's say the wife says, well, this is a more formal event and those look better with the suit that you're going to wear. And I think she's really a smart wife about how to create good feelings and move forward. She says, and you look so good in those black shoes and that suit. They just look awesome together. And that is the impression that I want to make tonight.
Right.
And he hears that. So now, but she, being also an open communicator, says, so I do want to know why it's important to you, why you want to wear the brown shoes. And he says, well, I've had a long day and I've been standing a lot, and my black shoes are not as comfortable as my brown shoes. And so that's why I'd much rather wear the brown shoes. And now, Antoine gave me this. I thought that was great. Is, that he knows it's more important to her. So he might accommodate because he knows it's more important to her and say, as long as we don't have to stay too long, I don't have to stand too long. Maybe if I know we're going to be standing around for all these cocktails, maybe if I can go find a place to sit down after a while. So this is actually sort of a collaborative solution. If he can think of a way to meet his own needs, or she can too. Maybe she comes up with that idea. Well, you only have to stand for this part. So do that, and thank you for being willing to wear the black shoes, because boy, they sure make a good impression. But I get it, And, you know, I do have to remind you, dude, that I am wearing these shoes and they are nowhere near comfortable as either of your shoes.
So, at least to the last one, which I think you say is the most important style, which is the collaborator and collaborating to resolve conflicts. And love for you to tell us why that's so important.
So both of the orange and the shoe examples, I juxtaposed or contrasted the compromising with collaborating. Ultimately, collaboration is about asking good questions. It's about finding out what is important to the other person and finding the depth of that importance. And sometimes through that question asking, you actually come up with a solution that neither one of you thought of before, because you start to hear. So that's the most positive thing you can do. By asking these questions, you can find out what's really important to the other person and why they were choosing this path. In that moment that they were choosing that particular decision or this path forward, they only had one idea in their head. But if the other person has asked good questions and heard what's going on with them, they might actually come up with an idea like, well, sort of like with the shoes, that I hear your feet are hurting you and you don't want to be standing up so long. So if you can wear the black shoes for the time you're standing up, then you can sit down. You don't have to do the schmoozing as long, and that works for me. But an even more out of the box thing might be a parent and child are arguing about curfew. And the child says, I want my curfew to be, or I don't want a curfew. And the parent says it's 11 o'clock, right? I mean, that's what I would say. Anyway, I'm old, so maybe I'm out of date. And they ask each other what's important about the curfew. So the child asks, actually, this would be awesome, wouldn't it be, if your kid asks you what's important about the curfew? If the kid asks you, well, Mom, what is it that's important about it to you? And the mom says, well, I want to know that you're safe. And I go to bed at 11 o'clock. I don't want to worry about you all night long. And I won't be able to sleep if I don't know you're safe. So an enterprising child, because kids are really creative, might say, well, I know how to help you with that, Mom. I can call in. I'll call in at 10 and I'll call in at 11 and I will tell you at 11 what my estimated time of arrival at home is. And if if you don't hear from me or see me before that time, I will call you. I need to call you again. So that's my promise. If you let me not have a curfew or have a later curfew, I will be checking in on a regular basis to reassure you that I am safe. And I will give you a firm time as to when I'll be back. The kid is problem solving, thinking about what is important to the parent. The parent might not have come up with that on their own, but in the conversation, they come together.
Yeah. Yeah, that you talk about curfew brings up a story. I'll tell you, man, I'm old when I can pull in these stories out of the back of my back pocket. But this is a curfew thing that was going on. This is years ago. Was out with the gang like I normally was on a Friday or Saturday night, and we were at this club. The name of the club is the Bus Stop, Okay, so I had a curfew and I was going to be a little late because I noticed what time it was. And, I didn't have that call in thing. I had just had to be home by that certain time. And I said, oh man. But I got on the phone. I got to say, I'm going to call my mom, at least let her know that I'm going to be late. So I call her, of course, and I let her know. I say, hey, just want to let you know, I know I'm supposed to be home at a certain time, but I'm still at the bus stop. Okay. So her response was, what are you doing at the bus stop? Where's your car? So she thought I was at the actual bus stop. I'm like, no, mom, I'm at the club, the bus stop. But point there was that we had an understanding of what my curfew was. We didn't have the setup time, but the end goal was I had to have my butt home by that time. And I wasn't going to be there. So I took it upon myself to, hey, you know what? I'm going to get ahead of it. And it wasn't like really late. It was like 15 minutes because I realized it was taking me a little longer to get home. But I would at least let her know I'm not going to be home at that certain time. Because there were nights where she would, or my dad, they would be up, making sure we're home by that time. So the one thing I didn't want her to do is be staying up later and going, hey, he's not here. So, but that was my curfew reference to, it wasn't much of a conflict, but just how it was dealt with at our house.
Well, it's also a great story about clarity of communication. So I love that. I mean, I'm at the bus stop and she's like, what are you doing there?
Yeah.
But that may have even broken the ice a little bit. Humor is an amazing tool in dealing with conflict. But we do have to be careful on timing. So that was sort of an accidental humorous moment because there was this two things called a bus stop.
Right.
And so those will not be missed. Those won't be looked at as a ploy or a
Right.
technique or anything like that.
Right.
We as parents are probably needing to be the ones that think about using humor to help our kids deal with something a little better. We don't like it as much when they try to use humor to make us feel better about something because it seems like they're blowing us off, right? But so yeah, you have to be careful about humor, but it is also a very, very successful tool
Yeah.
in the right time and right place.
Timing is everything,
The
right?
timing is everything,
You
exactly.
get that right.